Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today or tonight, depending on where you're zooming from. For me, it's 2 a.m. here in New York. So if I look sleepy or if I start to zone out, please forgive me. So my presentation is separated into two parts. The first will be about sharing my observations and response to the fellows in my group, Artistic Action in Practice in the Mekong region. And the second part will be a reflection about my experience and all the thoughts about Zoom I started having, namely what it means to use Zoom as a mode of exchange, what situations it can create, and some steps we can consider. So in a way, it's like a Zoom about Zoom. And I think it's something that we should reflect on, now that we are almost 1 year, almost 1.5 years into the pandemic. So from November 2020 to May 2021, over about a 6-month period, I was a creative interpreter for the group Artistic Action in Practice in the Mekong region. So here are the portraits of the fellows, and you can read all about their interesting practices on Mekong Cultural Hub's website. You can see really quickly that they come from different parts of Asia. Their backgrounds are also very different. Shifong and Stephen are both filmmakers. Fiona is a writer and poet. Miko, also known as Jen, is a producer. Dawn is a researcher. Tanom is a lecturer and has organized many artistic practice events. And finally, Sor is a lawyer who specializes in issues of human rights. And their practices are so interesting. I really urge you to go check them out on the website. So here we are, transposed into Zoom thumbnails. Very much like the situation we have right now. In the bottom row, in the middle is Rina, the staff from Mekong Cultural Hub, and she also joined us for our sessions. So with the extra time at home due to the pandemic, I started playing Animal Crossing, and I drew many parallels between its creation of a virtual space to interact and build to the possibilities of Zoom, where we could also interact and build. But also there were many similarities to how gamers spend their time in Animal Crossing and with real life. So I'll use images from the game as a way to illustrate certain points as I continue to share. And just a disclaimer that all the images in this presentation do not belong to me. So I didn't create all these beautiful worlds that you'll see next. So one of the themes that came up often during the fellows presentation was that of methods of resistance and camouflage. Many of the fellows were organizing activities without trying to gather too much attention from the government, or they came up with ways to communicate the activities in a way that would not go against the rules. So without going into too much detail, there were shared sentiments across the 6 fellows, and it felt like a situation of kindred spirits. And our Zoom sessions created that space for expression, much like how this Animal Crossing character created a space to share his or her feelings. So before each session, the curator Shifong would spend some time to facilitate a casual conversation between all the fellows, and each one would share about the COVID-19 situation in their own country. And the outbreak of the virus meant a greater control exerted by the government in the name of preventing the spread of the virus. So restrictions to movement and events were all put in place with the rationale of a worldwide pandemic. But for many, it was only the legitimizing and proliferation of authoritarian rule. So though the fellows were facing challenges within their own lives, the Zoom sessions were really encouraging. One theme I noticed was that of community-led engagement, that there was a very clear and shared mode of working among them, that they were very much listening or part of the community they were trying to engage. So for example, one fellow, Dawn, who works with people living in a small village, shared how she would try to build the relationship with them, and she never probes and asks them questions. What she does is that she'll share her own experience and let them respond to her. And over time, they would. And another fellow, Jen, developed a way that interviewees could share their stories without fear of repercussions. So she really prioritized their needs, in her practice. And finally, there was a sense of camaraderie and collaboration during the session. A collaboration actually took place from the meeting, which was Stephen helping to translate Fina's poem, The Fire of the Villages Next to Mine, from Khmer to Burmese. So it was an amazing time together. I really enjoyed it. And this was one occasion when Shifang suggested that we all bring drinks to our next meeting. And it was one of the rare occasions I participated. So of course I asked to take a screenshot. So I unmuted my mic and I was like, oh, I want to take a screenshot. Everybody smile. Yeah. So I'll now be moving on to the second part of my presentation, which is the ABCs of being a Zoom ghost. Spending so much time on Zoom as a bystander while the fellows presented and interacted allowed me to examine the platform in detail. So as much as it creates a space for expression and freedom, it also creates a sense of alienation and distance for those who are not the main speakers in the conversation, like myself, a ghost. And funnily, I think that most Zoom meetings are really similar to sessions where you call upon spirits. So for example, every time you start a Zoom meeting, you're like, hey, are you here? Can you please make a sound? Is anyone else there? We cannot see you. Can you switch on your camera? So because everyone is separated, you need to make sure of their presence through non-physical bodily means. You cannot see their body. So you need to try other ways to know that they are there. So perhaps by sound or by seeing their video. And some key characteristics about a ghost that I think many of you are familiar with. A ghost requires a medium. It's the invisible that's made visible. It's present, but it's absent. It's often a third-party observer. And the ghost retains some agency, but under direction of the living. So for example, like the ghost is hovering and then the living will call upon it and then it would, do something and show itself. And usually it's like a passive posture. Like if you don't disturb me, I won't disturb you. And across Asia, I think there's a prevailing belief of the supernatural. So on the top right is actually a image of a Hungry Ghost Festival in Singapore where they set up chairs for the ghosts to sit and the front row is reserved for them and no one else can sit there or something bad might happen to you. Yeah. So what are the conditions of being a Zoom ghost like I was? So I was present, but I wasn't participating. I was off camera. I was invisible. I was muted. So I was silent. Or if you are muted by the host, then you are silenced, as Oprah says. And I was watching and waiting. And the final thing is that it requires activation. So you're waiting for a vocal or textual command from the person with the authority to speak. So for example, someone, like what Dian said, like, okay, everybody switch on your cameras now, and then now respond in the chat. So that in that sense, all of us are Zoom ghosts right now watching this. So this thing about, having that space to speak and being present is also similar to the game in Animal Crossing where there can only be 10 villagers in your village at once. So if you want someone new to come in, then someone has to leave. So same in a Zoom session, there's only a limited amount of time that you have for all these speakers and not everyone can speak at the same time. So definitely, even though, Zoom is like for everyone to join in, but there will always still be a hierarchy of the speakers and the listeners. So taking a closer look at Zoom, I think we've all realized how it has institutionalized private space. For example, if you're on a Zoom work call at home, you can no longer behave freely in your home, but you are behaving like how you would in an office. And once you switch on your camera, it's like you're in performance mode. You speak up, you sit up straight, you talk properly, you are presenting. And also Zoom could be an equalizing force in the sense that anyone, anywhere can join the session and everyone can listen into it. But it can also highlight inequalities. For example, if you switch on the camera, then your home, your private space is on display and not everyone has the luxury of space. Maybe you're in a shared environment with your family members who are constantly moving about, or maybe you might not have access to stable and fast internet, so you're often being cut off. And this is a screenshot of this Twitter account called Rate My Skype Room. So they've now pivoted to rating Zoom rooms. So if you feel bad about your Zoom background, Lady Gaga only got 2 out of 10 for her really plain background. So thinking about future Zoomers, I think this experience of being a Zoom ghost has been really beneficial for me to reflect on the platform. So in the same way that there's a need to learn how to facilitate discussions in real life and create a safe space, I also feel that that expertise is also needed on Zoom. Just because someone is in the Zoom room doesn't mean that they feel welcome to speak. And as the host of the Zoom room, how can you create opportunities to hear everyone's voices? Representation matters, and the same hostile environment that minorities face offline might only be reinforced online. And there's also talk about the digital world as a democratizing force, but I'm not so sure about that. One of the fellows actually shared about an experience of a website not allowing his listing to be public because it was very new. So even online, there are gatekeepers and there are barriers that people need to overcome. And finally, how do we maintain engagement with our audience so they don't feel ghost-like? So now that we know, that people feel ghost-like on Zoom, how do we make sure that that doesn't happen when we want to maximize engagement? So I feel that, we are all increasingly living in the virtual world. Animal Crossing was maybe just the start, and, we're going deeper and deeper there. So on the right is actually a screenshot of a man in virtual clothes by a cyber fashion company. So people are actually paying money for virtual clothes. So it's not physical, it's virtual. Yeah. So finally, I just want to say that, for all our Zoom woes, if we feel a need to blame someone, we can blame it on Usher, who sang this song.
X, making X, Y, yeah man, Z, zoom around cause Zoom is the best. Vote to all the letters and now we're through. Oh, the ABCs are moving you. Yeah, the ABCs are moving you. Yeah!
So, thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. It's just so entertaining that it's an entertaining, but at the same time, it made me thinking: is it possible to include everyone in the, to be inclusive and to be democratic? I don't think so. I don't know. It's just me being pessimistic. But please, for those of you who are here who got triggered by Grace questions or what Grace presented, please, you can share your thoughts later on. So moving on, we have Sumitra here, and Sumitra will share her performative recitation. Sumitra attended the conference in the wake of COVID-19, Altered Context and Prospect for Arts in Asia. For Sumitra, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Good morning, good afternoon. And Grace, thank you for staying up so late. I would also like to thank MCH for letting me hover during the curated conference sessions. That was a very good experience. What I will be speaking about is some thoughts and notes that stood out during my 6-month engagement with the curators and the artists. Are we really looking at solidarity? Second slide, please. While working on a response to the multiple sessions during this time, I used some of my notes to create a word cloud which would highlight most used terms in the text. What came up was the following: access, class, resources, information. These terms registered across many fields during social justice movements and radical activism. Though rest, time, and distance from the world are also radical forms of self-preservation that have become important. What the pandemic has brought home is the reality of broken systems and a public that is not fully equipped, but trying to address that brokenness. Next slide. Need, policy, reflection, anti-establishment. While conversations about artists surviving happens, it has become impossible for me to look away from a need to address issues such as healthcare for labor and marginalized communities. A call to speak against the state, India has been seeing protests since the middle of 2019, beginning with campaigns against the passing of Transgender Protection Bill, now an act, and the protests across the country by farmers ongoing since September to 2020. Next slide, please. I'd like to now speak about some of the articles that we encountered while the curated conferences were going on. One piece featured by the Northeastern University places artists as survivors. This piece also has a heroic message but doesn't take into consideration nuances. For example, of the 46 million sexual unemployment claims in the USA, how many were from neurodivergent people or gender and sexuality minorities? The artists who use this time to think. Where and how are they placed in the social ladder? The shared articles did bring up one more detail. Who are the artists supported and how can access be made easier? In the case of Kenya, many artists have managed to move online, but what of those who cannot, whose practice is only live performance, for instance? The material published is at this point 2 years old, but highlights some important struggles which are bigger than just artists surviving and a novel global pandemic. Next slide, please. In Asia, art and culture spaces have been hit due to infrastructural failure. What has helped our community solidarity networks, but these were in place even before the pandemic hit. One example were the protests held in 2018 and 19 against the passing of the Citizen Amendment Act, which was passed by the Parliament. The Transgender Right Act was also passed. During these protests, solidarity networks were able to provide support to those affected by the National Register of Citizens and the Citizens Amendment Act. This slide is one of the many images from protests where people actively came out calling the government out on its bigotry. Artists spoke about enhancing communication skills in order to mobilize local communities. These local communities, including traditional artists who may or may not have access to urban infrastructural benefits. The artists spoke of community outreach, but it is a long-term plan as the pandemic is not a finite entity. Much like the HIV and AIDS epidemic, it is here to stay. It first broke out in late 2019 and we are almost halfway through 2021. Next slide. Because of our world of easy access to different countries and ability to cross borders, the danger of spread is more acute. And I'm speaking only to the upwardly mobile and urban connected folks here. Therefore, my question here is, are we really reaching out to those affected by lack of access? Constant speaking of invisible people, the realities of other classes has become starker. But there have been invisible people through time. Where people are still invisible, we are expected to conform. Looking at the AIDS crisis in comparison with COVID and quarantine, in making way to remember that what we learn, what we archive can do, help record what was learned. We should look at history a little more carefully, perhaps. Points in time when a viral illness has affected a larger global population. COVID is perhaps the catharsis the world needed, the tonic that would allow people to actually reckon with the class and race divide that is there. We lack the skills to engage with a world outside of us, rather the stark inability to see that the global crisis is affecting more than the arts. My urge to shout that a look into history would be useful. The virus has affected all races and genders alike. But just 40 years ago, AIDS and HIV were equally violent, and people were similarly met with ostracization from society. We do see some of this tendency even today. And my response is to try and highlight the insularity that spaces like the ones we are occupying right now tend to adhere to. So thank you for this time and space to allow me to do this. And yeah, that is my response.
Thank you, Sumitra. Thank you so much. So as you can see now, between what Grace presented and what Sumitra presented, it's slightly a different tone and different focus. But nonetheless, I hear the same thread. It's the invisibility. It's just a different invisibility. So yeah. So it just made me think about what is not, what is not said. It's kind of giving me more cue than what it said. So yeah, it just made me thinking. Thank you, Sumitra. And moving on, so this is the last presentation, and I would like to invite Fiona. So Fiona attended the conference of Thoughts on Art in Society, and her piece will be a multimedia letter. So please, Fiona.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Fiona. I'm based in Taipei, Taiwan. So I've come up with a piece titled Passage. Passage here for me is a metaphor to communication, to connection, and also our relations with the time. And later I will explain on this. So like Grace and Sumit, over the past few months, I've been sitting in a curated conference titled Perspectives on Socially Engaged Art and Culture in Asia, or in their last sharing in the May meeting point is titled Thoughts on Arts and Society. So with 4 participants, 4 art practitioners from different regions in Asian countries, and curator Janet, I believe it's also in a meeting room today here. All the fellows have been spending monthly gatherings together, talking about a range of themes, from personal intentions to collective agendas, and to a more contextualized exploration of their own practice in socially engaged art in the general sense. So I've been sitting in, like Grace and Sumin, as a silent observer and also a reflexive sketcher of what's happening in these sessions. And so this journey of me, because as you know, as creative interpreters, we 3 are expected from the MCH to come up with creative notes, quotation mark, at the end of this process. But because of this open-endedness of the idea of creative interpretation, and also the open-endedness of how we define our own role as a creative interpreter, I also have gone through a journey of filled with a lot of self-reflection of my own role and justification, and of course a lot of self-critiques. And at the same time, actually, over the past few months, I also went through personally a drastic change of my physical realities. You know, almost in a delayed way. Taiwan, where I'm from, went from being a virus success country into a place that witnessed an aggressive rise of COVID cases, and that put everyone in the semi-lockdown states in a very delayed way, and a shared anxiety in the condition of political and diplomatic complexities. And this change of my physical realities also have affected actually my sense of time and space, and my sense or my thoughts about intimacy, and even the way I reflect on what it means by being connected or being in an exchange mode. So maybe for that reason, after a lot of self-debates, I actually decided to give up on my original notes that was structured something like this. And then I turned to something like this. So I decided to come up with a notes written in 5 letters with different themes. And these letters are inspired from my past few months experience participating or sitting in all the session of the group of my group of curated conference. But when I wrote these notes, I was also thinking, if I'm going to write something, say leaving a note to someone who lives in the future, who has not gone through the same experience, the same past that I had over the past few months, what would these notes look like? So I'm not going to read through in details all these letters to you today. I think this letter will be published later on, I'm not sure when, on MCH website. Today, I'm just going to go through the themes of these letters and then try to draw some connections with what we're doing now today here. So my first letter is on how to describe our world to others. Because for me, I realized actually all type of exchanges or connections is actually a journey or the passage from the end of one's mind to the other mind. So in a way, we're kind of, in all types of exchange, we're kind of connecting one minds with the other minds. So, but then I feel that just like, you know, in some of the first meetings of my group session, we actually, our fellows started from talking about their personal intentions of being in this field and then doing what they're doing, and how they kind of try to make sense of themselves through the practice they're doing, and how do they find the relevance to the world they are in through what they do. So this inspires me a lot, and then I feel, I come to feel that the connections between one's mind and that of the others are actually, it's always incomplete. And especially if we do this based on what we see and how we depict the world from some shared order of things or some shared constructed knowledge modules. This kind of connection will always be incomplete. So, and then I find more than ever the importance of partaking with our own essence, and only with this can actually lead us to connecting with the other minds. And so these letters can be seen as such attempts of mine. Although I know that words can only become some fragmented passages, and the writing is just sketching of the now. But I still hope that these notes can arrive at some unforeseeable elsewhere on the reader's end. Perhaps it's you, my fellow audience in this meeting rooms, and I hope they will resonate to you, and then bringing some of the seen and the unseen. My second letter is on fragments of our time. So when I was creating these letters, I was thinking, okay, if I'm going to leave a note trying to come up with the keywords to describe the world or the time I'm in, what would that keyword be? And then for some reason, the word fragments came up. I see fragments exist in various forms. Fragments are the time slots we block for our to-do list on our schedule. Fragments are the screens of our digital products, and they're also the windows more than ever nowadays, the window for us to reach another end of the world. Fragments more than ever are also realities and stories of our time. I feel that nowadays it's too easy for us to become dictators of some microfictions, or we are easily turned into nouveau riche of individualized realities. And because of that, we're almost like Hansel and Gretel that are walking on a trail of pebbles and cookie crumbs. In a way, we lay some fragments, we drop some, and we pick some up along the way. And this process of selection and collection, in a way, determines whether we're led to some sticky, sweet gingerbread cottage, or somewhere that looks like a tranquil lake with a mirror clear surface. So sitting in all the sessions of exchange, I came to realize that all this type of conversation and exchange are actually also a process of selection and collection. It seems that our world is inevitably filled with all sorts of fragments. But our challenge here is not to reverse such fragmentation, but to resist by making things last longer instead of dissolving so quickly like crumbled cookies. And then with this careful process of selection and collection, maybe the pebble trails will eventually lead us to a glittering beach. My third letter is on trading of words and thoughts and the work in it. I read in an artist-writer Dian Ackerman's book, An Alchemy of Mind, about a research, an experiment carried out by a university professor where he delivers several pages to his students, and the students were requested to submit the thoughts, whatever came up in their minds the moment they got paged. And then the results of the experiment was quite interesting because among all the results collected, actually only 1/3 of them were actually sending, the actual words or linguistic thoughts. The rest of them were just whether either images, emotions, or some kind of unexplicable sensations. So what does this tell us? Turns out that our minds are all the time humming, buzzing around without us even being conscious about it. So what does this says about words to us then? Ackerman wrote, as social beasts, we trade words with others, negotiate meanings, use words as currency. Words form the backbone of what we think. So although it's impossible to have thoughts without words, it's rarely possible to know what we think without bronzing it in words. Otherwise, the thoughts seem to float away. Refine the words and you refine the thoughts. But that often means squishing a square into a round hole and saying what you can instead of what you mean. So we try to remedy that by piling up words like brushstrokes in what we call descriptions or explanations, or by blending images, or by adding emotional sounds to what we say. So this gives an intriguing thoughts on what we're doing today about the language we use. Like here we're using English as our working language, and about translation, and about interpretation. So the way I see it, actually every one of us, including the fellow participants of the group I'm in, and all of you here, we are all in a way translating our mind into words and trying to find a way to connect with each other through this type of trading of meanings. And in a way, you here with us today are all interpreters, and we are all creative interpreters together. Like the title, Grace, Sumit, and I were granted. My letter 4 is on manual commonalities of what we do. So since the beginning of my lockdown, that began in like 2 months ago, I acquired this habits of growing plants on my windowsill, like I guess a lot of people do here. So after killing several plants with overwatering, I came to realize that actually the key points of feeling how thirsty my plants are is actually to stick my fingers into the soil and feel the moisture of it. So I started to do this every day. And interestingly, whenever I do this, this kind of remind me to the first time I saw my 3-year-old niece painting with her hands, because as a kid, they cannot still manage the pens or the brushstroke very well. So this manual feeling, the sense of touch, made me associate with her squeezing those slimy pens onto the canvas in front of her. And then this further makes me wonder, can everything that's happening all have a manual side in it, which means there's some part of it that needs to be done by hands? And then my answer is yes. Even the gathering and exchange, whether it's online or offline, it does not just take the digital settings, the thumbnails on our screens or the grids that's shown, but it also takes a lot of back and forth management, one-on-one communications, administration, and our own work beyond these happenings. And then this is my last letter. It's on horizontal and vertical time. So I read somewhere in a novel that I find it's a very beautiful imagery about the sense of temporality that exists in us. So for each of us, there are actually 2 types of time. One is horizontal, one is vertical. The horizontal time, it spreads out like the landscape. So it's about all types of happenings, the particles will affect each other. one another in the same moments. So it's just like the moment of, the click in the mind that I get inspired from one of the speakers in my groups can affect the way I see or do my own other work at the same time. So the vertical time is about what exists between us and our predecessors that have in the field that have paved the road of what we're doing today. It is also the relations between us and our offspring, or what's between our present efforts and someone who lives in decades on, whose name we might not even know, and the time we cannot even foresee. I find that particularly in the art fields, a lot of practitioners have encountered a challenge of trying to explain the meaning or prove the significance of what we do now to people from other sectors. And we also find a challenge to kind of transcribe the values of what we're doing today to other people who might not so be familiar with what we do. And in my session too, the same question also keep coming back about this difference between cultural practitioners and professions like social workers. Why are we here? Why are we doing what we do? But this interesting sense about temporalities made me think that maybe this is how what we do matters. Maybe this is how what we do can actually transcends time and space. And because of that, when we talk about exchange now, the meaning of doing this is that whatever we are doing, whatever is happening, it all makes us eventually meet in a way someday. And for that reason, I would like to end my presentation with a thank you to all, every one of you here, all my fellow creative interpreters and MCH staff. Thank you all for being on this journey with me. I now believe and I hope we will meet each other very soon. And I really look forward to it. This will be the end of my presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Yay! I would just like to clap to three of you. Thank you so much for beautiful presentations. And oh my God, Fiona, you just made me, your presentation itself is like a pebbles. Like it didn't make sense in the beginning, but as we go along, okay, that makes sense. And every letter is kind of, coming back to another letters, and then it makes a whole sense at the end. So I think it kind of, that's also the analogy when we are talking to each other like this. It doesn't make sense. What is this? We don't know, but we can only make sense later on, and we kind of trying to connect our connections, our little connections and fragmented connections, becoming a whole experience. Yeah, thank you for that.